Hello carnivores, this is Caleb with Knutzen's Meats, and today we're going to be talking about butchering a lamb. So pay close attention if you've ever wanted to know how to cut up a lamb, or maybe you got a deer you need to cut up. This is a great video, teach you some basic skills. Here's our cunning meat cutter Corey. He's going to be our tour guide today of lamb carcass fabrication, pointing out the important points. There's the leg, the loin. We've got some rib into the shoulder and also some arm chops there. It's not too terribly difficult. Look inside there, we can pull out some of the kidney fat and find those ribs. So first thing we're going to do is take your knife and follow that flank right down that edge of the loin to where it hits the rib. That'll be when you know you've made it far enough. Once you've made it all the way there, go ahead and use your knife to cut right into the backbone. That's going to make a nice separation between the loin cuts and the rib cuts. So here we're going to go ahead and cut off those different flanks, and we can go ahead and bone those out. Now our next important step is if you can break the brisket there. This will make it easy once you take it over to the saw to get a nice even split. Now we're going to go ahead and cut the loin from the rib and go ahead and take that front section over to the saw and start cutting. First thing we're going to do is go ahead and cut off the neck bone. We're going to use this to fabricate some neck ossebuco, or some meaty bone out of the neck, great for soups. And here's where we're going to go ahead and split the rib section from the shoulder section. So now that we've done that, we kind of tidy up those ends. We're going to get a nice even split down the ribs. It's a pretty good money cut on the lamb. So we usually sell a rack of ribs for probably 45 to 60 bucks depending on the size. Very popular American raised lamb. Now we're going to go ahead and split those shoulder or blades right in half. And from this point, he's going to cut off a little bit of fat there, sweetbread. Then we'll go ahead and cut off the lamb shoulder chops, and then there's the arm chops there. So Corey's going to go ahead and do that with the other side as well. You can see he's also trimming off those sweetbreads. Some good old recipes for those, if you ask. And there we go. We got blade chops and arm chops coming from the lamb shoulder. So we'll cut those to specs. This customer wanted theirs about an inch or an inch and a quarter thick. And you can see the blade chop, very similar to the beef chuck 7 bone roast or blade roast. Every year at the Connell Fair, they have some of these arm chops that are garlic butter marinated. They're fantastic. Some of the best lamb I've ever had. So these are the preliminary cuts out of the shoulder and the arm. These are arm chops. We'll tidy those up and trim them up a little bit here. We're going to go ahead and do the other side now, a little bit faster. Corey's Red Bull is kicking in. These cuts can also be merchandised as a roast if somebody wants an arm roast or a shoulder roast. Very possible. Now here's a very famous cut. We're going to do a French cut rack. So he's going to go ahead and just kind of leave a good 5 to 6 inches of rib bone exposed there. Later on in this video, we're going to show you how to French that rack of lamb. So he's going to go ahead and do the same thing to the other side. Oui. All right, there's some boning we got coming up later. The fun part, doing all the boning. Now we got the loin. So here's where the loin and the legs intersect. Corey's going to take that over to the saw. Sure does help to have a nice bandsaw to split it right down the middle. So these loin cuts are going to be the same as a T-bone or kind of porterhouse steak on beef. Well, pork chops on pork. Loin cuts and rib cuts are more desirable, more tender. The farther away from the hoof, the more tender the meat. So there we have our bone-in leg of lamb. A lot of customers do prefer it with the bone in, We can also cut it in halves, or even cut it up in steaks if you want to do lamb steaks. This particular customer wanted boneless leg of lamb, so we're going to get a chance to see Corey boning it out here in a little while. We got those hind shanks. Now Corey's going to go ahead and trim up those loins, just kind of trimming off some of that extraneous fat and gristle and stuff that won't render once you go to cook it. Be careful not to cut out the tenderloin, that's where it's at right there. So Corey's going to go ahead and cut those loin chops. We can cut that to whatever desired thickness you want for processing the lamb for you. I'd say most customers prefer about 1 inch to 1 1/4 inch. Some do like them thinner, at 3/4 of an inch. Now he's cutting here. You can see the tenderloin's getting bigger, so they'd be kind of like lamb porterhouse steaks. And then he's cutting into some sirloin chops. That little end chunk there, that's good to make some kebabs with, or lamb stew. So we're just kind of doing the same thing with the other loin. Corey's go ahead, trimming it up, and then just go ahead and cutting it the same. We will trim off a little bit of that extra fat. Probably try to leave about a 1/4 inch of fat cap to make for a nice lamb chop. And we do showcase Anderson Ranch's lamb from Brownsville, Oregon. It's American raised, it's free range. We sell it out of our meat case and freezer. Now Corey's going to be going to work on the lamb shanks. A lot of good recipes for lamb shanks. We're going to do shanks out of the front and also out of the hind shanks. Ossebuco is a very common word. It's actually French for meaty bone. A lot of those wonderful French recipes utilize the flavor of the meat and the bone from the shanks, whether they be lamb or veal or beef. So Corey's going to start here with the neck. It's been a popular cut this year. So he's just going ahead and cut it in chunks. We will trim it up. Be very, very careful with your bandsaw if you have one. All right, up next, Corey's gonna tackle some trimming of the arms steaks and the shoulder steaks as well. Wow, he's so fast, look at that. So we're just cutting off some of that extraneous fat, trimming it up real nice, cutting off the little yellow venison, which we won't render when you cook. Now here is the lamb shank. So watch closely. Corey's just gonna go about 2 to 3 inches, take a chunk to the bone all the way through, do the same thing again. And what this does is it's great, so you can cook it whole and then boom, just cut it right at the bone. If you want to cut it up into pieces, sure it's hard to cut a bone with your knife, so that's the nice thing about having a bandsaw. Speaking of good bands, I highly recommend the Knutzen Brother Band. They're fantastic, as well as the Golden Ponies here in the Tri-Cities. So a pony walks into the bar and the bartender says, "What's up with your voice?" And the pony says, "I'm a little hoarse." So Corey's going to work here on the hind shanks, doing the same thing, just kind of cut that bone so it's easy to cook when the chef gets to have fun with it. So important part of doing those racks of lamb, Corey is Frenching the rib. What he's doing is cutting off the chine bone. The nice thing about it is when you cut off that little section of rib, we do the same thing on beef. Then you can cut off the rest of that vertebrae and make sure that bone is gone. So when you cook it, you'll just be able to cut it at each individual rib and not have to worry about cutting through bone. So we're going to town here on the boneless leg of lamb. You can see Corey does a really good job trimming off extraneous fat and some membrane and silver skin. So you can see right there, he's kind of following the muscle right alongside where that femur bone is, the leg bone is. And very delicately carving around the hip bone. You see that bone is actually connected right there in the hip. So he's just making his way to the bone and then following the bone right along where the meat is at. Now, boneless legs are advantageous if you're maybe wanting to butterfly the leg of lamb and say cook it on a grill And when you butterfly it, you kind of cut it open so it lays flat on the grill. So when you cook it or marinate it and cook it, it'll be nice and even as you cook it. So you can see Corey's following the bone on the other side and just kind of carving around that hip bone as well. So here he's making some progress on getting this bone cut out of the leg of lamb. You can see the secret is just to follow that bone really well. Now you can use this kind of bone for stock or soups as well. Now a very important part if you're doing boneless and you can go ahead and what Corey's doing right now is there's a gland right here inside the leg, and he's going to go ahead and remove that gland. Kind of has it gives the leg of lamb an interesting flavor. So we'll just go ahead and remove that gland, and the leg is going to taste a little bit better. So there's our butterflied leg. Now this customer just wanted them boned and tied, so we'll tie it back together. You can also butterfly those side portions, kind of cut them open to have a greater surface area that's flatter. So now we're going to learn a little basic in knot tying, which makes me think of a fantastic joke. Piece of string walked into the bar and the bartender said, "We don't serve pieces of string like you." So he walked outside. He was upset. He was angry. He got in a fight. Some guy tied him in a big knot. He came back inside and the bartender said, "Aren't you that same piece of string I told you never to come back in here again?" He said, "I'm afraid not." Just trimming off a little bit on the end pieces there. Boom. You got your boneless leg of lamb. Those can also be cut in half. Ah, that's me. I'm going to be showing you how to do some French cut ribs. Now at this point, I'm just cutting off a little bit of that extra bone, a little bit of that yellow weasand there. And I'm going to go ahead and you can see there's a little bone right there. What we do is just kind of follow that bone and peel off that little cap of meat that has some bone on it. So we can just get the really delicate meat from the ribs. Just using my knife to kind of follow along the seam there. Okay, so there's a little bit of extra meat we can bone out for stews and lamb burger. Okay, there's our ribs here. What I'm gonna do, just kind of try to make sure they present really nice. Cut off some extraneous fat. I cut out that first bone just because it wasn't very presentable. And then I can take both of the French cuts and put them together to make a little teepee. Definitely one of the showcase cuts on lamb. This is a French rack of lamb. There's also a membrane on the inside of the ribs. It's a good thing to peel that off because that won't render when cooking. So, bada bing, we're just going to put on some little aesthetics. I want to make sure you can see the bone. And we have a beautiful presentation here so our customer can really enjoy their meal. And there you have it, French cut rack of lamb. Voila. All right, now Corey's gonna get to town here boning out all that extra meat. This particular customer wanted some lamb stew, so we're gonna try to go ahead and get them a few pounds of lamb stew. All right, and here's our final presentation. There's the arm chops and the blade chops. We got some ossebuco from neck and shank, 2 boneless leg of lambs, some beautifully exquisite loin chops, and our showcase, the French cut rack of lamb, and some stew below. Thanks so much for watching. It's been a presentation of Knutzen's Meats. Please like the video if you learned something, and feel free to subscribe for more video content about our butcher shop. Thank you.